So listen, I'm not too hot on Stranger Things. I binged the whole series to get ready for the last season. Now that I'm done with it all, I think I can safely say that the series has just been way too overhyped for me. And while people's gut response is to just tell me that it's not for me, I think I disagree only based on the fact that I enjoy teenage nonsense mixed with some good horror. In fact, numerous videos on this very channel are aligned with that subject. So honestly, this show was for people like me, and I'm stating my bias now to help myself avoid superlatives and not sound like I'm just hating on the show because it's popular. And while there is a lot to unpack about this series, I already talked about teenagers last time, so this time I'm going to delve into the horror and focus more on the monsters within Stranger Things. So it's a bit redundant to say that the monsters in Stranger Things are evocative of Lovecraftian horror through the lens of Dungeons & Dragons to make it a bit more palatable to the common viewer. And while the Demogorgon isn't explicitly Lovecraft, the aesthetic of a monster born from pure evil from an unknown dimension sure fits the bill. And all of this on paper sounds really good. Children are faced with monsters born from existential dread from growing up and lasting trauma, and they make sense of it through the very game that holds them all together, which in various ways prepares them for the conflict, while at the same time, it shapes our lens for the story. And the idea of this is presented really well, the iconography and performances on behalf of the actors. However, this is not what the story of Stranger Things is. It's what it wants to be, but that is not what we see from the monsters in Stranger Things. See, every monster in Stranger Things is from the Upside Down.
Well, basically, there are parallel universes, just infinite variations of it. Which means there's a world out there where none of this tragic stuff ever happened.
Yeah, that's not what we're talking about.
Oh.
We were thinking of more of an evil dimension, like the Veil of Shadows.
Upside Down's relationship to our world isn't really delved into or explained. While well presented, the Upside Down is very shallow. It's really just what if the town we lived in was suddenly super evil, which seems to contradict the Stephen King It vibes the story had, because in It, the evil was the town, and that was the point. Stranger Things having the Upside Down be separate makes it seem like the evil is something different, but there's no real delving into that difference. It's mostly just the fear of some unknown evil. Which might make sense. In fact, Lovecraft has a very famous line saying that the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. Which is bad, because the thing about that Lovecraft quote is that unknown is a template. It is not the final goal, but a place to start and craft your monster that your protagonist will have to combat with. Which is why Lovecraft and all monsters need to be indicative of something larger, because that's just how monster fiction works. A creature, a beast, is born from some type of pure malevolence. They are something our human brain can't comprehend, so it takes the form of this horrid and malformed monstrosity, as this is the only way we can see them. Pennywise is a cosmic horror who takes the form of clowns, not only because they are universally feared by children, but also because children fears are the only ones tangible enough to create, which is why children are the protagonists. Godzilla is a creature born from literal nuclear waste off the coast of Japan, which I talk about in this video, and heck, even our favorite space squid, Cthulhu, is born from existentialism, the fear that we will one day die and have meant nothing in the larger span of things. Every speck of who we are will one day cease to mean anything.
The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far.
You see, all these fears are very specific and indicative of something larger, and I'm sorry, but Stranger Things just doesn't have that. The Demogorgon, the Demodogs, and especially the Mind Flayer in its meat form all don't culminate into much. Yes, the concept of a beast from another dimension that is trying to eat you or turn you into a husk of a person is scary. Yes, superficially the presentation is good, but there's no real lasting commentary with these specific monsters. The only one I feel is getting at something is the Mind Flayer from Season 2. I know Season 2 is considered by many to be the worst, but the Mind Flayer actually had something going for it, because only Will, a character dealing with some sort of trauma, and Eleven, another character dealing with trauma, could interact with it. Only they could sense and combat the Mind Flayer because they understood the creature. But of course, they're children, so they don't 100% know how to talk or communicate their fears to their friends. Doubled when you consider that Eleven, who is trapped in a house and retaliates against Hopper, knows how to fight it, while Will, who is now surrounded by his friends and family, does find an abstract way of communication through the drawings, emphasizing their different coping methods and creating a strong foil between them that even carries a bit into Season 3, even if on accident Season 2 actually created a monster that reflected the supportive motifs of Season 2 while also tackling the main theme. It's just unfortunate that it still gets wrapped up in all that government nonsense and demagogues.
This time, I didn't run. This time, I stood my ground.
Away!
Easy peasy, right?
Easy peasy.
And once again, I run into another kind of deflection about the fact that this series is just a love letter to past culture, which maybe I should say it's totally fine to like Stranger Things. I'm just shouting into the void. But that being said, there is a problem with Stranger Things evoking all of these past horror concepts as well. Because when you're evoking things of the past, especially in a tongue-in-cheek manner as Stranger Things does, you are acknowledging all of the strengths and weaknesses that come along with it. Heck, that's why something like Spider-Verse is so successful, because it builds on a canon we're all very familiar with.
In my dimension, like a lot.
With great power comes
Don't
great...
you dare finish that sentence. Don't do it. I'm sick of it.
But Stranger Things does not do that extra work. It does not build past these ideas. Having the Demogorgon emerge from the wall like Freddy Krueger, or have Will spasm like The Exorcist, or Nancy and Jonathan fight their bosses a la Night of the Living Dead, illuminates concepts and subject matter that these films evoke, but without their own building process. It akins the evocation to an analogy to endear me to the scene, and while it is effective for that scene in immersing me, when I stop and reflect on what happened, I realize how little substance there is to it. This is how scenes can be manipulative in getting us to like them, without doing the actual work of building their own story. Nightmare on Elm Street is about a horror committed by parents and passed on to their kids, which isn't present in the first season of Stranger Things. While the negligence and apathy of people is also in complete contradiction to Will's whole support group, so that meaning is lost, and the classist angles of Night of the Living Dead are just a whole mixed bag in the larger scheme of Season 3. The reason why these three series, as well as the other heap of references, are so endearing to us is because those writers understood horror. The creator of the series had intention and purpose with their storytelling. Now, is all of it good and positive? Different conversation. But there was intention and proper establishment of their own canon. Which is also the downfall of Season 2 despite having the best monster, because it's based on Lovecraftian fiction. Because, little note on Lovecraft, big racist, big white supremacist. You don't even have to look very far, because he wrote a poem in 1912 called, yeah, The Horror and Darkness and Corruption. Yeah, what do you think he meant when he wrote those stories? Yep. And look, I'm not saying any of that transferred to Stranger Things, but this is the problem with adapting Lovecraft. You really need to try to adapt with a capital A, or risk telling a boring story to avoid all that nonsense. While shipping the original meaning and keeping your presentation works for Lovecraftian fiction, it does not translate to the other works, because while the presentation was effective, the deeper meaning and proper interrogation of their subject matter is what skyrocketed them into the horror classics we all know today. Heck, it's probably why Lovecraft has even been able to populate the discourse today at all, because apparently cosmic space squids symbolizing existential dread are all the rage. Nonetheless, for as cool as all the monsters look, besides maybe that flesh monster, that's all they are, they're cool designs. And there's nothing wrong with that, aesthetic matters quite a bit, ask Oscar Wilde. But I do think with fear and having kids as our protagonists, there can be a bit of a harmful simplification. Even though something like It implies kids are the only ones with tangible fears, those fears are still indicative of larger things. Fears stick with us for a large number of reasons, and for a show about kids, geared towards kids, especially one leaning hard on friendship and the importance of support groups, there seems like there needs to be another layer of care. To say these kids fear something only for what it looks like or because of some other plot-contrived reason seems to be a bit of a reductive way of looking at being a kid. Growing up is terrifying, and there's so many things that can impede and obstruct the maturity process that it's no wonder why everyone's got insecurities and phobias. And I think Stranger Things has the audience and capability to demonstrate and display a healthier, yet authentic depiction of growing up in the face of all the things trying to tear you down. And monsters are the perfect analogy for these struggles in teenage genre fiction, because they can embody these abstract and almost unsensible fears, but also without simplifying them. This is the beauty of monster fiction and why it goes hand in hand with teenagers so often. And Stranger Things has that ability, it just doesn't quite capture it. Look, this doesn't make this series unenjoyable. Heck, it doesn't even make it bad. But as I said, as someone who on paper would have loved this series, I do find the feelings a bit frustrating because I want it to be better. I want the show to lean more into what makes it unique, rather than just reference more things that I like. But you know what? There's always hope for season 4, right? Right? But for now, that's all I got. Thank you for watching and sharing this with your friends, and I'll see you next time.